The Morrison government have today announced significant reform, as I said, of Australia's foreign investment rules. It's one of the biggest reforms since the Foreign Investment Review Board was established back in 1975. Overdue changes, I think I'd have to say that, overdue changes. There's still a lot of detail we need to get across, such as the level of transparency, public transparency, in terms of who owns what in this country. But in broad terms, I have to say, these reforms should be welcomed. And I wanted to talk to some people now about why we need these reforms, what the changes in practice will mean, and what's the level of harm we're trying to prevent. To do that now, I'm joined by someone well-versed in security and intelligence threats we face as Australians, the head of the Australian Strategic Policy Institute, Peter Jennings, tonight coming to us from Canberra, and Victorian Liberal Senator Sarah Henderson, who's been very vocal about the need to ban foreign acquisition of critical infrastructure from her very early days in the Parliament. Senator Henderson joins me now from the great city of Geelong. I'll start with you, Peter Jennings. Let's start at the very beginning. We talk a lot about critical infrastructure. Give us some examples of areas we mean there. And also, we understand defence assets and things like that. Explain why our energy networks are so vulnerable here, even something like our water grid. And if someone was wanting to do the wrong thing, a foreign player, what could they do to make things turn nasty if they had access to this infrastructure?
So Peter, the sort of infrastructure we're talking about is seaports and airports, some medical facilities, the electricity grid, the gas pipelines, water infrastructure, as you say. All of these areas in the last decade have increasingly been run using internet industrial control devices. And effectively what that means is that clever cyber hackers can actually find it possible to infiltrate into those industrial control systems and shut them down. The Russians demonstrated that they could do that to parts of the Ukrainian electricity grid in 2015. So, that form of cyber vulnerability is something that we weren't necessarily worrying about even 10 years ago, but has become a much bigger problem in terms of the potential for overseas countries to actually reach in, not just remotely, but also using the hands-on access that ownership and control can give you to do damage to critical parts of infrastructure.
Yeah, I mean, Sarah, imagine the chaos if they could shut down the power going to transport in Sydney and have a gridlock, or in some way meddle with power going to critical infrastructure like the Lucas Heights nuclear reactor. It seems that the community has long been ahead of the government here. Sarah, they've been asking, demanding for reform. Are you confident with the changes that have been put forward or announced today that they will be enough?
Peter, good evening. And I have to say this is very significant reform announced by the Prime Minister and the Treasurer today, which now, of course, includes a national security test for any foreign acquisition. But really significantly, the Treasurer has the ability to call in and force the disposal of assets owned by foreign nations if that is deemed to be necessary. So these are very significant new powers for the government. I'm absolutely thrilled that we have announced this today. It's something that I have been passionate about. And as Peter has said, there has been an increasing risk in the last 10 or so years, particularly with the prospect of malicious cyber attack. And we saw, Peter, just a number of weeks ago, US President Donald Trump made an executive order banning the importation of all Chinese electric equipment which could be used on the US power grid. So certainly a number of nations, including ourselves, including the US, are taking this issue very, very seriously, and I'm absolutely delighted by this announcement.
Yeah, Peter Jennings, I mentioned a little earlier, there's, I think, a very strong component, at least, of ongoing surety of compliance against conditions set by FIRB before, once they got through the sort of the assessment phase. Despite having compliance requirements, they were never followed up. So I think that's good. And there looks like there is some level of enforcement teeth. Are you happy with that end of the deal today? And do you think, in broad terms, the reforms themselves go far enough?
I think they're very welcome, Peter, absolutely, and Josh Frydenberg is to be congratulated for doing it. There's a couple of loose areas which I think still have to be thought through. One is, and Josh made the point today, we've yet to define which parts of critical infrastructure or business is going to be regarded as having national security importance. So one area which I think will have to be looked at under this new legislation is the university sectors. This is our third largest export after all. Hundreds of millions of dollars of money, especially Chinese research money, is going into university R&D. So that's an issue. The other problem is, as I understand it, this is all forward-looking legislation. There's a whole bunch of decisions that were taken over the last 10 years, including the sale of the Port of Darwin, much of our electricity grid and gas pipeline infrastructure, that we're now going to have to address how we deal with these problems. And I understand that, this does present a real difficulty for the government. They don't want to worry investors about potential sovereign risk in Australia. But I think the problem is if we're unhappy about that type of investment in critical infrastructure going forward, we surely can't be happy about the investment in exactly the same type of infrastructure in the last few years. So as good as today's announcement is, I think what the government will have to turn its mind to is how does it actually start to unpick some of those earlier decisions, perhaps taken when we were more naive about cyber security.
Just on that, I don't think that you will be able to sort of rescind a sale, if I can say that, Peter Jennings. But I do think that an ongoing compliance regime, because a lot of these sales were made with conditions attached to them that were not followed up. Clearly, they will be in the new regime. But surely any current sale, as well as future sales, should be subject to the compliance regime. I mean, that would normally happen if you brought in changes to real estate laws. You wouldn't be able to go and undo a property sale, but you would be able to subject the property sale to ongoing, taxation, let's say, or something like that. So I think that's where the focus should be. It's not retrospectivity in terms of the sale, but it's got to be retrospectivity ongoing in relation to compliance of the terms.
Let's hope that's true, Peter, because imagine that we've been running now for years and years a system where we had no ability to check whether the rules that we were putting in place for purchases were actually being followed. But that's what we've done with foreign investment. So I think there's a huge amount of work to be done to make sure that those companies are compliant and indeed maybe even following tougher measures around cybersecurity for some of this critical infrastructure.
I want to just, before we go, Sarah Henderson, play you a grab from Daniel Andrews in the Victorian Parliament. Now, I played this on Tuesday. It's worthy of playing again. It's a comment out of question time on Monday. I want you to listen to it. I'll come back for your reaction.
I wouldn't agree with the notion that I might go to Beijing and provide a lecture on a whole range of these matters, whilst at the same time encouraging the Chinese to buy Victorian product. I don't think that would be particularly conducive to more jobs or a stronger relationship. Now, if that is the mission of those opposite, to actually sell less goods to less customers, well, we don't agree with that approach. We don't agree with that approach. And if the Leader of the Opposition wants to lead a human rights delegation to China or any other country and then try and do a trade deal at the same time, I wish him luck, because I reckon he'll need it.
Right, Sarah, just a quick comment from you, and I'll get one from Peter if I can. Doesn't this just show that the whole price of Victoria's Belt and Road deal is the Premier admitting in his own language in question time then that Chinese government money, debt for Victoria, has bought the Victorian government's silence on issues like human rights?
Peter, I'm almost lost for words. I can't believe that Daniel Andrews made those comments, and I'm also the chair of the Joint Parliamentary Committee on Human Rights, and it's very concerning that there does seem to be the suggestion that there would be some sort of trade-off. There can be absolutely no trade-off, and our government has made that very, very clear, including in relation to the imposition of those security laws by China on Hong Kong. So I think Daniel Andrews is getting himself into very hot water, but we've seen an absolutely appalling reaction from federal Labor MPs here in Victoria also, Peter. So the bottom line is, and I expect, and if Daniel Andrews was planning any sorts of deals with any government, we now have much stronger powers announced today to control any foreign acquisition involving any issue of national security, and that's a great day for Australia.
Yeah, I've got to leave it there. I'm sorry, Peter Jennings, I've run out of time, but you and I am absolutely sure we'll be back talking about this issue in the not too distant future.
Absolutely.
Thank you all for your
Thanks,
time,
Peter.
Sarah Henderson, Peter Jennings.